Hello, I'm Professor Fred Long, and I'd like to welcome you to Koine Greek Grammar. We're going to be looking at Chapter 7, which will introduce adverbs and adjectives. We'll look particularly at adjectival functions and constructions. We'll consider some common uses of the article, and then we'll look at a couple of verbs that will take different objects than the accusative. The chapter concludes by taking a look at a couple of words that would be indistinguishable except for accents. But first, let's look at the chapter vocabulary. This vocabulary contains adverbs and adjectives, as well as a couple of verbs. Eti, yet. Noon, now. Palin, again. Adjectives that are formed with regular stems include agathos, agathe, agathon. These endings are masculine, feminine, and then neuter. That's what they indicate. That word means good or beneficial. Alos, ale, alone, other or another. Ekastos, ekaste, ekaston, each. Kalos, kale, kalon, good or beautiful. Pistos, piste, piston, faithful, believing. Protos, prote, proton, first or prominent. Adjectives that end with epsilon, iota, and rho will use alpha endings rather than eta endings. Aios, aia, aion, holy. Dikeos, dikeia, dikeion, righteous. Eteros, etera, eteron, different or another. Idios, idia, idion, one's own. Judeos, Judea, Judaion, Judean or Jewish. Makarios, Makaria, Makarion, blessed or happy. Nekros, nekra, nekron, dead. Poneros, ponera, poneron, wicked or evil. Then we have two verbs, akuo and pistevo, which are I hear and obey, and this verb can take the accusative or genitive for the direct object, and pistevo can take the dative case or be used with the preposition construction with is. Well, let's look at adverbs. Adverbs are little modifiers that function to modify verbs or other adverbs. In this lesson, we have just a few of them. Adverbs can be substantized. In fact, what this means is that they can be turned into a noun by having the article added to the front of them. In fact, prepositional phrases can be made into nouns as well. Throughout the grammar, we're going to be encountering adverbs at different points, and so you can see further those chapters. Adjectives are modifiers as well, except they modify nouns. They add meaning to nouns by giving further description. Adjectives can be formed in three different ways. There's the positive meaning, the comparative, and the superlative. So if you take the adjective cold, that's the positive degree. You can put it into the comparative degree, colder, or the superlative degree, coldest. We'll look at comparatives forms and superlative forms in chapter 25. For now, we're going to focus on the positive degree endings. What you'll notice about the adjective endings, these are first and second declension adjectives, is that they use exactly the first and second declension endings. You've already learned these endings when you've learned the article and first and second declension nouns. So there's no new endings in this chapter, even though you're introduced to two new parts of speech, the adverb and the adjective. So here's the paradigm for agathos, and you can look at that and learn these endings. Now, adjectives are fairly dynamic. They can function in a variety of ways. One way is actually as an adverb, and usually what happens in this usage is that the adjective is going to be put into the neuter singular form. So protos can be found in the neuter singular to mean first or firstly. More commonly, though, adjectives will function either as nouns or as modifying nouns. When they're forming a noun, it's called a substantive use. The word substantive is a grammatical word that means something that acts like a noun. So nouns are substantives, but other parts of speech may function like nouns. Adjectives can stand alone to function like nouns. Now, what noun can be supplied in English will depend on the gender of the noun form or the adjective form that is created. So usually we supply a generic word or generic noun with the adjective when it's used in this way. Now, one way to identify the substantive adjective is that it will stand alone. It won't be modifying any noun. And that's a clue that you're looking at a substantive adjective. So the formation is simply an article with the adjective, or sometimes just the adjective itself. Some examples that you can look at. Notice that if it's neuter, a generic neuter noun in English. If it's feminine, a Calais, we would supply a generic noun, the beautiful woman. If it's masculine, we might supply generically the evil man. Another very common use of the adjective is what's called the attributive use. The attributive use is when the adjective is with a noun, ascribing an attribute to that noun. The construction will be this. You'll have an adjective with a noun. Now there may be an article with it, and there are a few different constructions with the article in relation to the adjective and noun. And these are described in terms of position. So if you have an article, then an adjective plus a noun, that's called the first attributive position. And you can look at these examples. A second attributive position is a bit more marked because the article repeats. You have an article, then a noun, and then the article, then the adjective. Now notice that this is quite different than English. So in this example, we have the soil, the good. Now that doesn't make any sense in English. This gets translated as the good soil. But notice the repetition of the tain in this case, tain gain, tain kalein. It contributes to an oral impact on the part of the listener, the hearer of this, and I think there's a bit more emphasis in this kind of construction. The third attributive position is when the noun is followed by an article and then the adjective. This is much more rare. And then finally you have a fourth position in which the noun occurs with the adjective with no article. Here are ways in which you may translate these constructions. Notice that they often may come in as equivalent in English, although the constructions vary slightly. Again, I think the construction with the repeated article, because of redundancy and the effect of rhyming, adds more emphasis to that modification. In this case, there's a bit more stress placed on the modification that the adjective brings to the noun. One final use of the adjective is called the predicate adjective. In this construction, the adjective forms a predicate, and it may occur with or without the verb imi. So the law is spiritual. Pneumatikos is a predicate adjective. It becomes part of the predicate affirmed of the subject. So the subject here is onomos, the law. Then you have estin, and the adjective is part of the verbal affirmation. This is called a predicate adjective. Now sometimes the construction is made without the verb imi. So you might have pistos o theos. God is faithful. So you may have simply the adjective and then followed by an article and the substantive or the noun. That's the construction. Sometimes it's hard to know which construction you have, and it depends on context. Now there's some common uses of the article that we can consider now. First is the substantival use of the article. Remember that a substantive is something that is made into a noun or functions like a noun. You can take an adjective, prepositional phrase, even an adverb, add an article in front of it, and you basically substantize it. And you conceptualize that modifier into a nominal entity. And here are some examples. Another use of the article is called the previous reference use. This is anaphoric. When someone has been already encountered in the text, the article can accompany the next instance of that noun to indicate that, hey, this is the noun that I've previously been talking about. For example, in John 1:4, the word zoe is introduced and then given an article in the next instance. Sometimes the article will function to indicate an implied family relative, and it's simply a matter of knowing the person and their family to identify exactly the referent. Are we talking about a mother or wife or son? And that can be a little bit confusing, but literally those who know that person would know what the article stands for. So Maria e Josetos is Mary, the mother of justice. You'd have to know these people to know that this is the mother as opposed to the wife. There are other uses called pronominal uses. These are so-called pronominal. And what this means is that sometimes the article seems very appropriately translated in English by a pronoun like he or she or they. For example, in narrative, you may have an article followed by a the, and this indicates a he. Or you might have a you followed by a the, and this would indicate a change to the subject they. This is a classical way of marking a change of referent in narrative. And so it's a way of alternating between one subject and the next subject, then back to another subject. Sometimes the article may seem to be translated like a relative pronoun. The glory which is from the only God. However, this really only marks the second attributive position. I have favored that is, the glory that is from God, because I think this helps convey the emphasis there. The next section to look at is 7.5, non-routine direct and indirect verbal objects. And basically here, there's a couple of verbs that can take different objects. For example, akuo can take a thing as an object, and that can be indicated either by the accusative or the genitive case. This can be a little confusing for students because they're used to seeing the direct object as an accusative. But you can have nearly equivalent expression in parallel passages indicated by different cases. And so you can look at these examples. Now, when the person is the direct source for what is being heard, that is put into the genitive. The person about whom one hears is put into the accusative. With pistevo, this verb can take the direct object in the dative case, but it can also indicate the direct object with the preposition is. And that preposition with is is a bit more marked because it's adding another word, a preposition, to mark the direct object. Finally, we have a section that differentiates forms based on accent, and you can read about that. Be sure to look at the case in point, which looks at adverbs and how they impact meaning in Galatians 4:6-9.